Hello and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Munoz, CEO of the cultural communications agency, The Flash. Each episode, I bring on a different business leader who's doing some game-changing work. And I am so excited to have Doni Aldine, who's the editor-in-chief of Cultures Magazine. It's going to be a great conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Doni.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We've already found out that we're probably cousins. So
yes, indeed.
I always love when that happens. It's like, oh yeah, probably.
Yep.
So you've been listening to the podcast, you know what the rules are. The very first question is always the same. So Doni, what was your first job?
My very first job was at Hot Dogs and More in a mall in Colorado Springs. And it's interesting. So I'll tell you a little bit of my backstory. My whole life is just this conglomeration of crazy stories. But I lived with this white family when I was in high school because we lived in Turkey right before we came here. My mom was pregnant with twins. She started to go into labor on the plane. And when we landed in Denver, they whisked her away.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And some strangers whisked me away and other strangers whisked my older brother away. I was 14. And so I didn't see my family for a month, didn't know where they were really. And then after a month, my mom was out of the hospital. And then 6 months later, my little brothers got out of the hospital. Then my family left because we are a very globally mobile tribe. They left, but my mom did not want me to switch high schools. Wait, did I miss some stuff in there? I won't tell you the whole story.
We're good. I'm sure it's a little longer. Well, no worries. Go on. So you ended up staying in Colorado.
Stayed in Colorado. Well, actually, first at the time she was in the Air Force. She ended up going to Korea. My older brother and I stayed in a house. She left us a house, a car, and credit cards. And we had a guardian that she didn't know until recently, which is like many decades later, that the guardian didn't ever come to see us. So we're on our own. Yes, right,
oh my
right.
God.
Running the streets, man, let me tell you, I had a good time. So, but we were good kids. So it's not like we were doing anything horrible, but man, I loved it. And so when she came back, my brother graduated high school. She's like, okay, pick a friend you want to stay with. So that's how I ended up with this family. So how that comes back to your question is that the family was very clear to me that they were not going to drive me around. Okay. And I wanted to get a job. And because my family paid for me to stay with them. And it was always a thing. Every month they were asking me, where's the money? And I was like, I'm just a child. Why are you asking me? Call my mom, So what they didn't know is I wanted a job. So then I would have the money to give to them. And then when the money came from my mom, we'd be set, right? So one day, one of my friends was like, hey, I got a better job. I don't want to work at Hot Dogs and More anymore. Do you want this job? And I remember looking at him, and you could see the process going through your head, like, well, they told me they're not going to drive me and it's far away. It's at the mall downtown, And so he could see all that going on. He said, well, you said you wanted a job. And so I said, okay. And I took it. And they drove me. I only asked every once in a while and they would drive me. And then finally they were like, look, we told you not to have this job. But anyway, that's how I got my first job. And then they offered me to be assistant manager. They wanted me to not go to college. They wanted me to stay and be the assistant manager at Hot Dogs and More. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? So that's my story.
That's pretty awesome.
I have a pretty crazy life.
I can see this. I'm almost scared to ask this next part of the story, but like, why not? Okay, so you're currently in Colombia. So clearly your journey has been eventful. So in 5 minutes or less.
I know, right?
What was the journey from Hot Dogs and More to becoming editor-in-chief of Cultures Magazine?
Well, it's so funny. Actually, that is relevant, which is why I told you that whole story. I've been traveling since I was 2 weeks old. I was born in New York City. As you know, my dad's from Costa Rica. My mom is from Trinidad and Tobago. And I grew up on 5 continents and 7 cultures. And that whole journey and the way I think, the way I formulate things, which is why I told you that story, is what got me here, right? Like it wasn't a straight path. It was a zigzaggy path that's now finally getting back to being international. Because once I became a career person in the United States, I no longer traveled, right? Not to the extent that I do right now. I mean, when I was younger, I lived in all these places. I went to school in Germany. I made a point to be adventurous, but then I got so ambitious. This is going to sound funny. I got so ambitious that I stayed within the confines of what people would tell me I could do. Like, for instance, Pepsi Cola was one of my first jobs. I was an intern at Pepsi in undergrad, and they told me, I said, I want to go international. And they said, well, it'll take at least 5 years. Well, to me, I was like, 5 years sounded like an eternity. I was like, what? So I didn't take that route. Now I look back and I see that's not a big sacrifice, but at the time it seemed like it. And so I ended up just staying confined and didn't pursue my international dreams. So now I'm editor-in-chief for this magazine. I also teach a class at Colorado State University. I'm on a faculty called Media and Global Culture Identity. And so that it's all finally come full circle, and hot dogs and more is where it started.
Wow. So, because, it always comes back to a circle. That's how it always ends up being. So, thinking about your career, what's the challenge you had? And you're like, there's no way I'm going to get through this. And then you did.
Oh, man. There's, but I probably think the last few years, I'm actually teaching at my alma mater right now. And so I had a love for it. Anyone who's ever done that, it's obviously different when you're on the other side, right? Universities are about students. And so they treat students in a certain way, and faculty and staff are different, right? So coming back, and also you and I were having a conversation about that global way of thinking and how Blackness is not a monolith, right? And so the term for what I'm called is a third culture kid, or an adult third culture kid. And that's someone who's grown up globally. And it's really marked by the mobility of your movement as you're forming your identity, and the fact that you don't have the stability that a monocultural person typically does, right? You're very fluid. You could go in and out of cultures. You typically understand other people, and that gives you a broad experience where you understand a lot of other people, but they don't necessarily understand you. So coming to the university, it's been interesting because I do a lot of DEI work. I mean, Cultures Magazine is really about those in-between spaces and getting people to understand that those nuanced spaces matter as well. They need attention. There's people that are longing for a place to call home, right? And so that's why we welcome them home, because we understand them and we have that place for them. So going to university and having people say, no, that's not diversity. Diversity is this, right? I'm like, well, I'm still Black. Or they say, well, you're not from the United States. I'm like, well, yeah, I have a US passport. Can I have 3 passports? Yeah, but I'm from the United States. And so they just end up being perplexed. So dealing with that and going through the motions, one of the gifts and one of the challenges of being a TCK or growing up globally is that you're very adaptable and you know how to relate to people. And so it's really interesting to have watched myself go through these motions of, okay, how do I relate to these people? And then again, full circle, come back to, no, you're just you. You just stay you. You don't have to adopt their way of thinking. You don't have to be like this. Just stay who you are. And that's an interesting thing to have gone through this late in life. I didn't go through those motions earlier in life.
Awesome. Yeah, because it's a different experience. And so you float in different rooms with ease that a lot of folks just aren't able to do. And
yes.
And as a result of that, makes you very flexible. You're like, okay, cool. What do you want to do? I'm down for whatever. And I think
when I was younger, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, when I was younger, it didn't bother me. Like, I embraced that. But after, I was married for a long time as well. And we ended up getting divorced. And I think in the wake of that, it made me question, like maybe I'm a little too solid, maybe I'm a little too confident into who I am, maybe I should be more open to other ideas. And I'm actually glad I went through that, because it made me come around to, I'm very open to other ideas. I think that's what keeps me fluid. And I can still do that and be solid in who I am. And it doesn't matter if other people agree with it or not.
Exactly. You can just make it out. You find your own damn way, and it's not anybody else's business how you figure that out.
Yes, 1,000%.
But obviously, now, how is the past year's pandemic affected you? Because, I think for so many folks, it's affected us for everyone, it's changed everyone's world
Yes.
in unique and different ways. For you, what's been the thing that you can kind of point to, like, wow, that I wouldn't have thought about doing this a year ago, but now here I am.
Yeah, well, it's the reason it's a big reason I'm in Colombia. So I shared with you earlier, my father, again, who's Costa Rican, unfortunately passed away from COVID Easter last year. He'd been fighting cancer for a long time, and he lives in New York City, and had to go to get chemo in the worst place, in the worst of the worst, worst state, worst place within the state, worst country, arguably at the time.
Yeah, it was pretty bad here.
Yeah. And so he had to go to the hospital every week. And he caught COVID at the hospital on a Thursday. And by Sunday morning at 1 a.m., he was gone. And so he's Costa Rican. His native language is Spanish. And I have, over my lifetime, spoken Spanish, French, and German. I went to school in Germany. I took 8 years of French. And of course, I say to people now, I barely speak English, but I lived in Spain when I was young. And so I kind of blew off Spanish, because in my world, I was like, everybody speaks Spanish. I want to do something different. And that's why I went to French. But for about a decade now, I'd really been wanting to get back into it, because it's part of my heritage. And it was something that he never said, but I know would have made him so happy and so proud. So when he died, I was like, you have to, like, there's no choice. So by the end of this year, I will be refluent in Spanish. And so with COVID, I stayed in my house. Like, I think I went out maybe 30 days all of the last, out of about 14 months. And of those 30 days, we're talking maybe 2 hours max at a time. And most of that time was in the weeks coming up to me leaving for Colombia, because I had to, right? And to get everything together. And so for my mental health, I think I had to get out. Even though I had lots of Zoom meetings and had a ton of work, I wasn't seeing any humans. I didn't have any human touch. And I also, the social pandemic that we've been having in the United States, the shootings, and I live in Pleasantville, USA, and we were getting notifications of shootings and stabbings in my neighborhood. And I was like, here's what's funny. People were cracking up. My staff was like, okay, you won't go out in the street in Colorado, but you're going to fly to Colombia during COVID. And I was like, 1,000%. Because
I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah. From a social standpoint, really, I was that traumatized after seeing, and also I think when you're a person of color in the United States and everything that's been happening, all the anti-Asian hate, seeing all the shootings, people being killed, like literally over and over and over. And then in Colorado, actually, I hate to say it, but this weekend alone, there were 9 shootings in the United States. And one of them was in Colorado at a birthday party. Whereas last month, I think it was, we had another shooting in a grocery store where my sister-in-law is a manager at the sister store to that one, right? So it gets pretty close to home, and it's scary. So all of that, like, I hate to say that I was just triggered I just couldn't. So anyway, coming to Colombia was easier for me to do than walk out my front door. And also there was the component of feeding my soul. Here I have this goal to be refluent in Spanish. I am used to traveling internationally. I love being in different cultures and around different people. And it makes me feel like I'm delving right back into my heritage. So there were many reasons that brought me here, but this is the result, very much so, of COVID.
Wow. And you find your way. I think that's the thing that's the most advantageous about it all. You find your way. Yes. And if that's getting out of Dodge and going to Colombia, then it's getting out of Dodge and going to Colombia. So I do not blame you. And so kind of going in that level, now that you're obviously in Colombia, what are you doing for your self-care?
Well, I mean, this to me is self-care. I mean, when I was in the States, when I was at my house, I meditated every day. I ended up getting, I don't know if you're familiar with the hydro. It's kind of like a Peloton for rowing. I had gotten one of those because for over a year, I only walked from like the kitchen to the bedroom to the bathroom. Yeah. I set up last year, my balcony was like my oasis. And I called it my Italy because I was supposed to be in Italy. And so I had it all set up with flowers and furniture and umbrellas, and it was beautiful. And all the neighbors would be like, oh my God, how'd you get all that up there? So at home, I took a jet tub bath every night. I sat on the balcony every day. I meditated later, closer to when I left. I started working out on the hydro. Those were the things I did for self-care at that time. But now being in Colombia is my self-care. Speaking Spanish is my self-care. I had a meeting today and they were like, wow, I can hear the joy in your voice. And I think that comes across. So each of us has to find, what is it for us? It might not be somebody else's self-care. I mean, and there's protests here right now, right? People have been calling me because on the news, all they see is people dying and, tear gas and things like that. And just like in the States, people need to have a voice, and they're trying to be heard. And that's what's happening down here. So we've had lockdowns and we've had curfews, and I still, through all of that, found my joy. I mean, it's joyful to be here, and I understand where the people are coming from, just like I do in the United States.
Awesome. And honestly, I think that's the one thing, in spite of this insane pandemic, that I have actually found back. I've got this new energy that I didn't think I would have had. I think I was burnt to a crisp because of being on a plane every month for 8 years.
Yes.
And to finally sit my ass down really came in handy, even though I was forced to. I just feel like I'm more creative, and I've been able to open up all these other different doors because I had time to actually think. And I think I'm in a place now where it really has, you find your joy in whatever way that might be, and wherever that might be. And you have to do, especially as Black women in business. Like, we know how stressful it is.
Right. Right.
So,
right.
You have to figure out a way you have to deal. So thinking about all of that, what do you think you'd tell 25-year-old Doni?
Oh my gosh. 25-year-old Doni. 25-year-old Doni. Wow. I would say, well, the first thing that came to me is it's not going to be like you think it is. But then the second thing that came is it's exactly how you think it will be. And that's that full circle thing again, right? So here's what I just did that also brings me joy and is a little shocking. And it's kind of funny that I had to come around to this. So the things that I enjoyed when I was in high school, I mean, I'm pretty in awe of who I was in high school in terms of my fearlessness and knowing who I was and knowing where I wanted to go. And what I realized recently, because I was thinking to myself, every year you make these, they're not really goals. I don't do, what are those called, New Year's resolutions, but I do my map for the year, right? And I'm like, it's funny, you always put these things on here that are important to you, but you never go for those things that really mean a lot to you. So the Spanish, right? Another one is calligraphy. Another one is working out, like to the point of bodybuilding, which I used to do.
Wow.
And I remember, I love, and I'm so much back into it. And I remember as a teenager, because I was 2 years ahead, another long story that I won't tell you, but I was 2 years ahead. And as a teenager, saying that would be my dream job, to be able to live internationally and work out, be creative, like do things with writing and calligraphy. But when it came down to making decisions, career decisions, I never chose any of those things, right? And so I just made that realization this year. Well, actually, I made the realization last year, but this year I did something about it. And I was like, you know what? No, you're not going to skip over it again. You're not going to keep going for those other things that who knows why I choose those. Maybe in the back of my head, I think I should do those. But I'm like, these are the things you're going to focus on this year. And so, yeah, first thing was, it's not going to be like you expect it. And I think that's a zigzag path, right? And then
totally
the second
fine.
thing was, second thing is it's exactly what you expected, because where you started is where you're finally coming back to. And you were right all along.
That's great advice and so true. I think, I think you all right. Your gut tells you that, if you're going to change the world and move mountains, and in your gut, you think you're that, and when you're 25, you'll find a way to do that. It may not look like what you originally thought it was going to be, but it will be, it'll be exactly what you wanted it to be. Like, I would so agree with you on that one. Oh my goodness. Okay. Last question for you. Do you have a give and or an ask of the audience?
I do have a give and I have an ask. So my give is
you can do both. You can do both. That's fair. You're allowed.
Well, I guess I'll do my ask first. My ask is that they open their minds and that they're empathetic. And I have a feeling that you have a lot of listeners who are this way. So what I mean by that, being empathetic and opening your mind, is, Cultures magazine is about the in-between spaces. So the people who grew up globally, who were straddling cultures, the multiracial, multi-ethnic people like me, immigrants and refugees, and people who fluidly go back and forth through culture and never really, or I shouldn't say never, but a lot of people don't feel fully understood. They very much put themselves out and understand others. And so that's my ask, is that people are open and empathetic when someone's viewpoint is different than yours, or you don't fully understand, to just kind of be vulnerable and put yourself out there to try to understand where they're coming from and give them some of the energy that they give to you. That's my ask. And my give is that I have a free copy of Cultures Mag that we will give away, either a digital copy or a print copy if you want to pick up the shipping. And we will give that to every single one of your listeners, and you can pick which one you like. I like to think it's an amazing publication, and we get people every issue that tell us how much it touched them. No one's ever understood how they feel, or they're in tears reading through and seeing that there are people who get them in the world. And so I would like that to be my gift to your audience.
That's beautiful and fantastic. And we'll put the details in the show notes so folks can grab that. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Doni, this is the first of many, 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 many conversations.
Yes.
So, you are a delight and a ray of sunshine that is lovely to have on a Tuesday afternoon. So thank you so much for joining me in the podcast today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. You have already told you, man, you made my month. Yeah.
I try.
Succeeded.
Awesome. Mission accomplished. Awesome. And so we'll put all the details in the show notes for folks to reach out and connect with you on all the social medias and get a copy of the book, of the magazine. And this was wonderful. Oh my goodness, so lovely. And that is our show.